How do we know that we are sufficiently recovered to do today's workout? That is the topic of this first video in the Educated Runner video series. I will have some audio only, and I'll have some like this where we will be having some visual aids. I took this topic first for no particular reason except that it is something I'm implementing in my coaching practice at the moment. I think both for you as an individual runner and as from my perspective as a coach working with individual runners, the most difficult thing to get right is to actually gauge whether what we planned maybe a few weeks or months ago that we should do today is actually what our bodies want to do today. So in this little video, we are going to look into, is there a way that we can measure that more intelligently? Is there a way we can prompt ourselves to make intelligent decisions for our training plans and not follow them blindly? Because I think this is the mistake that almost all of us make, is that once a plan has been committed to paper, we find it mentally very, very difficult to deviate from that. And that is when a lot of bad decision making happens, when we train to a level that is beyond what we want. In Arthur Lydiard's words, that's when we begin to strain rather than train. Most of the great coaches found that to really reach your maximum potential, you do need to train most of the time well within your own capabilities, almost to the degree that training can be somewhat boring, because you're not pushing the envelope and the limit every single day. Our biology simply isn't designed for that. So how can we find out how our condition is on the day? I wrote an article on my Patreon page recently which started to introduce the area of heart rate variability. Heart rate variability, without going too deep into it, is a measure that has been shown to very consistently indicate whether we are in an adaptive state on any given day. So that means whether we wake up ready to take more punishment and actually have, you could say, the adaptive energy, the reserves, to make something out of the stress that a workout will put on the body. So quite often when that is not the case, whatever training we do is wasted, because most of you will remember that the equation for training is that training plus recovery indicates performance or fitness, not training without recovery. So heart rate variability is a measurement that shows us whether our bodies has returned to a recovery state, what's called a rest and digest state, which means that the part of your autonomic nervous system that's called the parasympathetic system is dominant. So the sympathetic part is its opposite and is called fight, flight, or freeze, which is a system you need in a crisis situation or when pushed to the limit, but you don't want to be walking around all day in that state. And if you wake up in the morning and your body is still sympathetically dominant, so it's still kind of in this fight and flight stage, that could be a really bad time to apply today's workout, because you are not in an adaptive state. You're not ready to take any more punishment. The way this often happens is that we do a workout, let's say on a Sunday, maybe a long run, a bit harder than we had planned. And by the time we wake up on Tuesday morning, Monday's recovery run was not sufficient. Maybe we had a tough day at work as well, or some other stress going on in our lives. That meant by the time we woke up on Tuesday, we are still not recovered, but the plan that I, as the coach, wrote you 3 months ago says you must do intervals on this Tuesday. Because you don't want to bother me, maybe, or because you say, well, he probably won't, I want to do the run in an hour now before breakfast, I don't think he'll be able to respond to my email that quickly, I feel okay, I'll go ahead and do the intervals. Sometimes this sort of subjective assessment of our own capability on a given day is sufficient, especially if you're very experienced, very good at reading your body signals, but quite often it's not, because in the running and endurance community in general, we're all a little bit obsessive. So we have a tendency to want to do a little bit more than is actually necessary, and we think more is always better, and we think that if we don't execute our workouts on the day as given, we're already going to lose some of this hard-won fitness. So I'm saying we have a slight, sometimes obsessive compulsive disorder in this community of sports. So the only way to toil those sort of instincts is to gather a second opinion almost instantly. And that's quite easy if you're an elite maybe, and you walk down on your track in the morning, your coach is standing there waiting for you, he sends you out for the warm-up, and he can straight away see you don't look right, you look a little bit jaded. He might run you through a few strides and maybe even the first rep of your interval, and he says, I don't like the way his gait is looking, I don't like the tension in the muscles, etc. Coaches can read people as well as horses, if they're the good old school caliber with that sort of experience. But in online coaching, which is about 60% of the work I do, besides being a regular club coach down trackside, or in our case it's pitch side, we don't have that ability because we only see workouts after they have been done, and we only see the numbers. So even if you are kind of one of these types of dream clients who puts a lot of subjective feedback into your workout saying, oh, I felt like this and this, and the heat was this and this, that's all after the fact information. So that helps the future decision making and planning, and it might help me assess, oh, this workout wasn't as fast as we had hoped, so this was the reason. But it's too late in a way. The damage is done, the car has run off the road, it's in the ditch, and it needs to be hauled out. So is there any way we can insert a middleman between yourself and myself, or if you're self-coached athletes listening to this, between yourself and yourself? Because when you coach yourself, you're really splitting yourself into two people. The person coaching you and the person executing it. So you kind of put the hat on and off as you go through the day. Now there are multiple tools, and the one I'm currently testing is called iFleet, although I pronounced it iFleet for a while, but I think it's iFleet, which is just an online platform that is linked to a sensor that you can purchase, a normal heart rate monitor or a finger sensor depending on your preferences, that will measure your heart rate variability, which is, as I said, it's the gold standard for measuring how rested your body is. It's more reliable than just the resting heart rate in itself, but it also measures that. So before I kind of tell you too much, you can see here that I have a measurement here from the 10th of June where my heart rate variability was 106. You can see that was 2 less than the day before, but it's still considered green in relation to my general level. And my resting heart rate when this was measured was 44. And I know from history that my very lowest would be 37, and generally when I'm not super fit, as is the case at the moment, it's somewhere between 40 and 48. So before we go into what those numbers mean, I can give you the lowdown on heart rate variability. One, it's individual. So that means it's not like resting heart rate where we say, ooh, this guy has 28, that is phenomenal. Very few people have this. The only thing we know is that lower is worse and higher is better. So it's the opposite of your normal pulse, your normal heart rate. So a high heart rate variability is a good thing. If your heart rate variability is low, your system is depressed and it's less and less likely to respond positively to more stresses, i.e. more workouts that are demanding to your system. You need to collect data over a bit of time before this then becomes meaningful, because the first few measurements, we don't know what your regular is. So just to have that in mind when you start monitoring this, if you're not doing it already, that it won't really mean a lot for the first while. So how do all these systems work, and how can you integrate them into kind of a system that's easy for you to execute? Well, I use Training Peaks as the platform for sharing training plans with my athletes, and Training Peaks is really just another online platform where I can enter workouts, and then as people upload their fitness data to Garmin Connect or to Suunto Moves Count or whatever sort of GPS watch and online system they use, their workouts get synced into our Training Peaks system. I can see then the numbers that I spoke about. I can see how their average fitness is. That's basically, how heavy was the load of the last 6 weeks. How heavy is the fatigue, which is the load of the last week, and how is their form? That's the difference between the two. But apart from that, I can't really see what is actually going on with their body, because, and this is where most often it goes wrong. Everything looks right by the numbers, but actually what's happening behind the scenes is that this athlete is being depressed by the training they have, but they haven't yet noticed it from a conscious perspective. It's not so obvious. They're not falling asleep at work every day, but they are actually on the way to not performing in their training. So with this system, iFleet, if we link this in with this sort of system, and if you're a Garmin Connect user who doesn't use Training Peaks, you can still sync Garmin Connect directly. So the way that works is, in this kind of dashboard that I'm just scrolling down, you can see there is an ability to sync your Garmin Connect account or your Training Peaks account. Now, you can only sync one of the two, because what it does is it will take from Garmin Connect the score that illustrates how tough was this run. So I think it takes the training effect score from Garmin Connect, if you're using that only, and it takes what's called a training stress score from Training Peaks, which is the one I prefer, because the training stress score is a brilliant way that Training Peaks has of quantifying how tough was your run, both in terms of how long it was, the duration, and how intense it was, so the heart rate and the pace. So that means that's a very, very good way to try and quantify, okay, what was the stress of the workout that we put in. So once you have pulled that data into this dashboard here, you can see these dark bars. So you can see, for instance, here there's a TSS, and it pops off as a little blue square window there saying TSS on Tuesday, the 22nd of May, 64. So that was the level of stress, and then all I need to do is look at, well, around that period in the 24 to 48 hours after, how was my heart rate variability? So I can see here that my TSS of 64 meant that the next day when I measured my heart rate variability, it was green. It was 105, which for me is pretty good. Average heart rate was a little bit high, 47.3. You'll also see it notes here a training number. That's a subjective number that you can enter. If you don't have access to Training Peaks or Garmin Connect, then you can enter that. And usually the way to do it is rate your workout from 1 to 10, how intense it was, and then multiply that by the amount of minutes you ran. So if you ran for 30 minutes at an intensity of 3 out of 10, you could put 90 in here. But I prefer to have these dark bars because that actually reflects what's captured by my watch, by my heart rate monitor, and by my power meter. So all of that real data can be compared with another set of real scientific data here, which is the heart rate variability. So essentially now we have the two key things. How much stress did you put in, and how did your body respond in the period after? So I decided, let's do a little experiment. Let's go out and run a lot, because I had a group of tourists, a lot more than I do normally, and let's measure my heart rate variability every day and see what happens. And you see these blue bars here, so we had a TSS of 151, followed by 166, followed by 106. So that was a lot more than I used to have. So going into that weekend, my heart rate variability was green. On the second day, it was orange, 99, it had dropped, and on the third day, it was at 95, so it was now flagged as red. So that meant my system was being depressed by this training that was unusual to my body, and I needed time to recover. So I took 2 days off on the other side, and right enough, you can see, bang, by the time I do my next workout, I'm back in green, and my heart rate is back to normal. That's what we would want to see, and the mistake here would have been for me to go out maybe on the Sunday morning, which was after these 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday's hard work, and say, oh, I'll just do another one. I feel okay, and actually by the afternoon I felt, yeah, I could run if I wanted to. But my system clearly, once measured, you see, disagreed. And in this case, by removing the load, I got a very quick bounce back into green. So all of this can be measured just with this simple integration between the iFleet data taken with the iFleet monitor and with my Training Peaks or Garmin Connect data taken by my watch. So this is something I urge all of the athletes that I work with to use. So you can really get under the hood and every morning check in on yourself and see, am I actually in a state that I should be doing the session I do, or should I dial it back to an easier session, or maybe no session at all. So I hope you found that useful. We'll delve more into it in the future. Thanks for now.